course, there are many changes taking place during the lockdown, quarantine period, whatever you might call it. And one of them might be, for you, working from home, or more broadly, we call it remote work. It basically means working in a location that's different from everybody else. And during this time, working from home is, well, it's been estimated it will be an option for about 40% of American workers. We'll just see how that really turns out. There aren't any good figures yet. Now, like many things that are happening during this period of essentially pushing the reset button in the economy, in our lives, in our ways of thinking, this is going to only accelerate a trend that started already. Remote work was an option for as many as 45% of all workers, but the number of companies that were remote only was very, very small. And that means that the entire workforce is remote. It was an option, it was remote capable companies where they would allow it 1 day a week, whatever. This is an important difference. One of the things that many people are probably experiencing in this remote work that they're having right now is that they're just not set up for it. They don't have the ergonomic equipment. They don't have the daily schedule. They don't have the mindset, the routine. Again, this, like everything else, is a skill, and you have to learn it. And you have to be very deliberate about doing it. It's an experience, but you also need to know just what you're doing. And if you go to remoter.com, if I could plug something, you can learn a lot more about it. But successful remote work really depends on being very deliberate about everything. For example, you might now have a morning stand up that you never did before, where everybody checks in with everybody else, says what they did the previous day, what they're going to do the next day. This is extremely important among many other things. Having the right equipment and all that is great. But this was a trend that was going on for many years. Perhaps you were working with people from other countries, even that were in the same workforce but weren't anywhere near the same location. How does that happen? Well, again, it requires a lot of attention to detail. See, employment law varies dramatically from one country to the next, within the US, even within one state to the next. Intellectual property laws vary dramatically from one country to the next. So protecting what work you might be doing is extremely difficult and important. This is one of those things that's going to continue to bring the world closer together. Only about 8% of the workforce was estimated to be fully remote before this, but it's going to increase dramatically. Now, this means that what? Wages are going to equalize all around the world. I mean, for example, let's just say that you are a skilled worker in a field like programming, and you have difficulty finding work where you live. Let's just say that your local currency, let's just call it the ruble, is a 100 ruble note from the 90s. Let's just say it's not all that stable and has lost about three-quarters of its value since 2008 because every time the government gets in trouble, it prints more. And you really would like to be paid in dollars rather than these. Well, remote work is a possibility. And it's all about having, yes, all of the technology, the chat systems, etc., be able to share code and so on. This really took off in programming first. But what's more important are the systems that people have the ability to check in and manage the remote work. That needs to be set up front, as well as the attitudes. And then finally, well, we have a whole lot of other skills that kind of come along with it, a lot of other important considerations. I mean, for example, remote work, generally speaking, comes with an agile environment. Now, what is agile? Well, it's a new way of working. If you've experienced it some, you might say agile means you never have to plan. Unfortunately, that's the way it comes down for a lot of things. But what agile is basically a week by week project based focus. You have very specific goals that you accomplish from 1 week to the next, and you report against those very specific goals. It's great for project stuff. Maintenance of institutions, not so much. But it works well in the programming field. And well, a lot of people who live in this economy in Russia have been working in a very agile environment for quite some time, as well as here in San Francisco. It works well for programming. But it lends itself to something else that is really, really important. See, 25% of all American workers now are contractors. In other words, they're hired just to do a project. And most of these remote workers that we have seen, that 8% so far, have been contract workers. That means they don't have the benefits. They certainly don't have a vacation plan. They only get paid when they work. And do they have health care? I mean, it varies dramatically from one person to the next. Do they have any protections? Do they get paid on a W-2, or do they get stuck with a self-employment tax of 7.62% in the United States? All kinds of different things. Now, one of the problems with this is it's gradually marched along, and we've gotten up to, a quarter of the workforce is contract, is that laws have been terrible about keeping track of this. I mean, again, I mentioned the self-employment tax because it bothers me. And I'll get into sort of all the changes that take place in the workforce in terms of the basic overhead per employee. But what's important to note is that things have been changing. People have been more contract, they have been more remote, they have been more project-based, especially in the areas of programming, software development, which lends itself to it. This is only accelerating that. And we cannot neglect the fact that this makes everybody around the world united in one thing. Despite the fact that we have remarkably different laws and different currencies, we have people who have been making all of this work, and that will accelerate. The experience remote working may not have been great, but hopefully you're figuring out how to do it. And companies that have said, oh, we can never be remote, they are now. They're stuck with it. If the experience isn't too terrible, this will be a trend. And this has a lot of implications for commuter traffic in cities. Do we really need mass transit when this is a possibility? Or for that matter, how does it change the relationship to the automobile generally? How does this change wage laws, etc.? There are so many things that have simply not caught up. I'm going to do another video on the overhead cost per employee. This is something that really bothers me dramatically. But for now, think about the ways of working, how they have changed over the last 20 years, how they've changed dramatically in the last 2 months. And you can see how this is likely to change in the future. We're working from home, but we're working globally. We're working for set projects for pay, but we're developing relationships that last for life. How is this coming together? What kind of special skills do you need? Again, technology, techne, is all about the skills, more than it is the hardware like this little device that's recording now. Everything is changing, and this is going to accelerate that dramatically. It brings the world closer together. At the same time, it separates the world. Something to think about. And it also, frankly, puts a little more pressure on countries to do a better job managing their money somehow. There has to be a better way to do this. I mean, when we look at trade in goods and services across the world, employment, writing software, that's a service, right? It's going to become a bigger part of our world exports. Hopefully, you're doing well. When we say that roughly 40% of all workers are working from home, I got to add 30% are considered essential, 30% might lose their jobs. We hope it doesn't come to that. But for now, remote work, working from home is a real thing. I hope you've got the ergonomics together. I hope you've got the schedule together, the mindset. You're getting used to this. You're staying productive. You're staying healthy. Because this is a trend that's going to continue. And we're going to see it accelerate. And you're going to see different levels of English skills among your coworkers in the future. All right? You've already seen it. It's only going to accelerate. And this is something that our policies, our laws, and our politics in general are going to have to start catching up to dramatically. All right? I'll see everybody. Thank you.